Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Marcie Taylor Thoma, a civic educator and consultant from the Center for Civic Education in the state of Maryland. I'm going to begin by thanking you. Every day you make a difference by being civic educators and by supporting the teaching of civics in a more inclusive way. These programs, practices, and policies continue to improve the civility of your youth. And I thank you also for being leaders, for developing in young people the capacity and the inclination to be both informed and voting citizens. John Quincy Adams said, quote, "If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, and do more, and become more, you are a leader," end of quote. At the founding of any democracy, public education is considered. Who gets educated has evolved over time, and we now realize the value of creating productive and capable citizens, no matter their economic, social, and intellectual capacity. As Thomas Jefferson said, quote, "Whenever the people are well informed, they can be trusted with their own government," end of quote. Clearly, public schools have the unique potential to reach far more children than any other institution, and to reach them at a young age when responsible citizenship can be inculcated into their worldview and their behavior. Margaret Branson, co-founder of the Center for Civic Education, often spoke about the different definitions of civic education. For some, it means carrying out your civic responsibility through registering and voting in elections, sitting on a jury, or carrying out other civic responsibilities in your community. One of the broader ways to think about civic education or education for democracy is to consider the civil responsibilities of individuals. For example, educator and philosopher Nicholas Machiavelli asked several questions. What does it mean to be civil as a participant in a democratic society? How does one deal with disagreements and resolve them? I would add, what are the implications for civility in dealing with others' different and perhaps contradictory perspectives from your own? Does the responsibility of teaching the qualities of democratic life go beyond the home and classroom and become the responsibility of all of us? I would answer yes. Civic education needs to be the most inclusive of all of our subject areas. We should embrace the opportunity to educate all the children from pre-kindergarten to adulthood at their unique level of receiving, engaging, processing new information and skills. Another way to think about preparing youth for living in a democracy is by teaching about the evolution of human rights and liberties in society. Aristotle said, quote, "If liberty and equality is as thought by some chiefly to be found in a democracy, they will be attained when all persons alike share in the government to the utmost," end of quote. This statement conveys an important thought. However, what might be missing from Aristotle's statement is the idea that participation alone is not enough. Research indicates that students who have received an effective program in civic education become informed, responsible, competent participants in the political life of their communities and their nation. Their commitment to these values and principles should serve as a moral compass guiding their participation in both their private and public relationships. They should have acquired the knowledge of politics and government and the intellectual and participatory skills that are required for informed and competent participation. And finally, they should have developed the public and private disposition or traits of character, such as civility, tolerance, and compassion that enhance their inclination and capacity to participate in political life in a manner that is conducive to a healthy functioning of the body politic and the improvement of society. Let us talk about the role of educators for a moment. There is an abundance of evidence that knowledgeable, skilled, and dedicated teachers are one of the most important factors, if not the most important single factor, in providing a sound civic education for our students. Teachers need adequate preparation in both the substance and the methodology. This has never been more evident than the latest research done by Georgetown University's professor, Dr. Diana Owen, under the U.S. Department of Education Supporting Effective Education Development Grant Program. Dr. Owen is the lead researcher in the Center for Civic Education's James Madison Legacy Project and the Project Citizen Legacy Project, and has researched how the increase of teachers' pedagogical knowledge of civics through professional development increases students' understanding of civic topics, skills, and dispositions. Future teachers need to be able to explain the fundamental civic rights embedded in our society to their students. The issue of privacy, for example, has seldom been more at the forefront than the era of the 21st century social media. Teachers should have a better understanding of whom they are teaching these days. Students begin school with different ability levels and experiences, but must be taught and included in an already busy and sometimes an under-financed classroom. Public opinion surveys report the public's adherence to different education norms. Times are changing in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Local, national, and international government and non-governmental organizations, professors, administrators, and educators embrace the idea of an inclusive civic classroom. Thanks to Professor Illich and his inspirational group of textbook authors and researchers, teachers are field testing lessons and ideas in their inclusive education classrooms. Politics have intersected with education, though, to create a context within which a variety of events and perspectives influence social studies and civic educators. Instead of being irritated about this, we must consider how we can harness our strength and make this work in our favor. The United States has a long tradition of associating the success of democracy with the education of the public. Should we be concerned that ignoring the importance of preparing young people with the intellectual skills that Jefferson thought were necessary for citizens to be capable of free and independent thought? Or Dewey's thoughts of an elevated social awareness, respect for universal justice and civility? If the desired outcome of civic education is an enlightened political engagement, how will we accomplish these goals during such times? These are trying times for both of our countries. We are not just challenged by the worldwide health crisis, but also by the great digital divide. More than ever, we can see how some communities, some educators, and their students just don't have internet access to learn and work online. Both of our countries are struggling with meeting the virtual learning needs of students and teachers. Furthermore, we cannot be satisfied with any educational reform that focuses exclusively on student learning, even though, rhetorically, student learning has become the bottom line of every reform and policy initiative. The argument for extensive student-teacher knowledge reform is equally untenable. Policies and reforms need to address teacher learning as a means to improving student learning. The two must mutually unite. Researchers realize that the risk entailed in doing this kind of teaching we are all advocating, and why it is then even more important to create structures within our schools that permit and support teachers as they take these risks. The greater challenge of inclusive education is a new level of hope. Why shouldn't all the children be given the same opportunities to be civically engaged and responsive? Realizing the vision of creating a more inclusive educational platform depends on all of us. We need participation of the stakeholders, reflecting, supporting, and improving educational practices. No one should underestimate the difficulty of this task, but now is the time to undertake collaborative efforts, implement appropriate policy, and support our researchers and professors. Inspire educators and leaders to help make this vision coalesce. There is a stronger need for the leadership at the Education Center for Democracy and Human Rights, Civitas, and at your own individual schools and school systems. In closing, I was just a little girl in elementary school when President John F. Kennedy was killed in Dallas on November 22nd in 1963. Yet the memories of that moment will stay with me forever. I found the speech that John F. Kennedy was to give in Dallas on that afternoon relevant to the topic of civic education. He was due to address the Dallas Citizens Council with these following words, quote, "Americans' leadership must be guided by the lights of learning and reason, or else those who confuse rhetoric with reality, and the plausible with the possible will gain ascendancy with their seemingly swift and simple solutions to every world problem. End of quote. Civic educators and inclusive education advocates understand that translating these ideas into practice is anything but simple and swift. You also know that civic duty is a function of action, not simply just good intent or thoughts. The quote that Kennedy was most famous for, of course, was, quote, "And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country," end of quote. The words became the slogan for civic participation in this country and the world at large. Since this quote, we have struggled over civility and equality issues, assisted other citizens around the world to understand the importance of independent thought and eagerness to be engaged in society. Their hunger for action inspired them to be reformers, civic-minded individuals who participated actively in their communities. But let me close with the last paragraph of President Kennedy's undelivered Dallas speech, which applies as much today as it did then. Quote, "We in this country, in this generation, are by destiny, rather than choice, the watchmen on the walls of world freemen. We ask, therefore, that we may be worthy of our power and responsibility, that we may exercise our strength with wisdom and restraint, and that we may achieve in our time and for all time the ancient vision of peace on earth, goodwill toward men. That must always be our goal, and the righteousness of our cause must always underline our strength." End of quote. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address you today. You've been most kind and gracious, and I'm honored to work with you on this ambitious new reform.